The morning sun peeked through the thin curtains of Rachel's modest suburban home, casting soft golden streaks across her living room floor. It was early, and the neighborhood was still quiet, save for the occasional chirping of birds outside. Rachel sat on the edge of her couch, tapping her phone screen absent-mindedly as she scrolled through contacts. Her eyes landed on the number for a local handyman service, and after a moment's hesitation, she pressed the call button. Rachel had been meaning to fix the flickering bathroom light for days now, but like most things in life, she kept putting it off. The bulb wasn't completely out, it just blinked on and off unpredictably, as if mocking her indecision. But this morning, something about the way the sunlight poured into her home made her feel restless. She wanted order. She wanted everything to work the way it was supposed to. And so she decided it was finally time to get help. Within an hour, there was a knock at her door. Rachel opened it to find a tall, broad-shouldered man standing on her porch. He wore worn jeans and a faded blue work shirt that looked like it had seen better days. In one hand, he held a toolbox. In the other, a clipboard with a piece of paper clipped to it. His face was kind, his dark brown eyes scanning hers briefly before he offered a polite smile. "Hi," he said, his voice deep but warm. "I'm Marcus. I'm here to take a look at your bathroom light." "Oh, hi," Rachel replied, stepping aside to let him in. "Thanks for coming so quickly. It's been driving me crazy." Marcus nodded as he stepped inside, wiping his boots carefully on the mat near the door. "No problem. That's what we're here for." He followed Rachel up the stairs, his footsteps steady and deliberate. She led him to the small bathroom, at the end of the hall, where the offending light fixture hung above the sink. The room smelled faintly of lavender-scented candles, and a neatly folded towel sat on the counter beside a bottle of hand soap. Marcus set his toolbox down on the tiled floor and glanced up at the light. "So what's going on here?" he asked, tilting his head slightly as he examined the fixture. "It keeps flickering," Rachel explained, pointing upward. "Sometimes it works fine, but other times it goes dim or shuts off entirely. I've tried changing the bulb, but it didn't make any difference." Marcus hummed thoughtfully, already reaching for his tools. He pulled on a pair of gloves and climbed onto the step stool Rachel had placed nearby. As he unscrewed the cover of the light fixture, he spoke casually over his shoulder. "This happens sometimes when the wiring gets old or damaged. Could be a loose connection, or maybe the switch itself needs replacing. I'll have to check it out." Rachel leaned against the doorway, watching him work. There was something calming about the way Marcus moved, methodical and confident, as though he'd done this 1,000 times before. She noticed the faint scuffs on his knuckles and the way his sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong forearms. He seemed completely focused on the task at hand. His brow furrowed slightly as he inspected the wires inside the fixture. For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the occasional clink of metal against metal and the low hum of the house settling around them. Rachel found herself studying Marcus more closely, not in a curious or intrusive way, but simply because she couldn't help noticing how comfortable he seemed in his own skin. There was a quiet dignity about him, a sense of purpose that radiated even in such a mundane situation. After several minutes, Marcus stepped down from the stool and turned to face her. "Looks like the wiring is frayed," he said, holding up a section of exposed wire for her to see. "It's nothing too serious, though. I can fix it pretty easily. Shouldn't take more than 10 or 15 minutes. "That's great," Rachel said, letting out a small sigh of relief. "I really appreciate it." Marcus smiled briefly before turning back to his work. But as he began reconnecting the wires, Rachel hesitated. Something about the moment felt oddly intimate. The two of them alone in this tiny bathroom, sharing space in a way that felt both ordinary and profound. She realized she didn't know much about him beyond the fact that he was a handyman. What was his story? Where did he come from? Did he enjoy this kind of work, or was it just a means to an end? And then, almost without thinking, another question bubbled to the surface, a question that had been lingering in the back of her mind for years, though she rarely gave it voice. It wasn't necessarily about Marcus, but rather about the world they lived in and the invisible lines that divided people. She wondered if it was okay to ask. Would it offend him? Would it seem rude or intrusive? Before she could talk herself out of it, Rachel cleared her throat softly. "Marcus?" she ventured, her tone tentative. He paused mid-repair, glancing over his shoulder at her. "Yeah? I, Rachel faltered, suddenly unsure of how to proceed. Her cheeks flushed pink, and she crossed her arms self-consciously. "Can I ask you something personal?" Marcus straightened up slowly, setting down his screwdriver. He turned to face her fully, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he simply looked at her, as if trying to gauge her intentions. Then, with a slight nod, he said, "Sure. Go ahead." Rachel swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, the moment of truth. She had no idea how he would react, but she knew she couldn't turn back now. Taking a deep breath, she forced herself to speak. "Do you ever feel like people treat you differently because of your skin color?" The words tumbled out in a rush, clumsy and unpolished. "Like, even when you're just doing your job?" As soon as the sentence left her lips, Rachel regretted it. What had she been thinking? This was hardly the time or place for such a heavy conversation. She braced herself for Marcus's reaction, half expecting him to laugh it off or politely change the subject. Instead, he froze, his dark eyes widening ever so slightly. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. The silence stretched between them like a tightrope, fragile and precarious. Rachel's stomach churned with anxiety, and she wished desperately that she could take the question back. But then finally Marcus exhaled slowly and shook his head. "No," he said quietly, his voice tinged with disbelief. "I wasn't expecting that." Rachel winced, her embarrassment growing by the second. "I'm sorry," she blurted out. "That was probably inappropriate. I shouldn't have." "It's fine," Marcus interrupted gently, cutting her off. He ran a hand over his shaved head, his expression thoughtful. "Honestly, I don't mind. It's just not what I was expecting." Rachel nodded quickly, still flustered. "I understand if you don't want to answer. I've always wondered about stuff like that, and I figured you might have some insight." Marcus studied her for a moment longer, his gaze steady and penetrating. Then with a slow nod, he said, "All right, fair enough." And just like that, the tension in the room began to ease. Rachel felt a flicker of hope. Not because she expected Marcus to give her all the answers, but because he hadn't shut her down outright. Maybe, just maybe, this could lead somewhere meaningful. Marcus leaned back slightly, resting one hand on the edge of the sink as he regarded Rachel with a mixture of curiosity and caution. The question she had asked hung in the air between them, heavy and unspoken, like a storm cloud waiting to break. He wasn't angry, far from it, but he couldn't deny that her words had caught him off guard. It wasn't every day that someone posed such a direct and personal question, especially in the middle of fixing a light bulb. Rachel, for her part, looked like she wanted to disappear. Her face was flushed, and she kept fidgeting with the hem of her sweater, pulling at the fabric nervously. She glanced at Marcus, then quickly looked away, unsure of what to say next. The silence stretched on, broken only by the faint hum of the house around them. Finally, Marcus sighed softly and crossed his arms over his chest. "All right," he said, his voice calm but measured. "Let me ask you something first. Why do you want to know?" Rachel blinked, taken aback by the question. She hadn't expected him to turn the tables on her so quickly. For a moment, she struggled to find the right words. I guess I've always wondered," she stammered. "About how people treat each other, you know? Like, I hear about these things happening on the news or from friends, and sometimes it feels like they're just stories. But other times it feels real, like it's closer than I realize. And I guess I wanted to understand." Marcus nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Okay," he said. "That's fair. But here's the thing. Understanding doesn't come from asking questions like this once in a while. It comes from listening, really listening, not just today but all the time." Rachel bit her lip, feeling a mix of guilt and determination rise within her. She knew he was right, Asking one question wouldn't magically make her an expert on race or inequality. But still, she pressed on. "So, does it happen to you?" she asked hesitantly. "Do people treat you differently because of your skin color?" Marcus hesitated, weighing his response carefully. He didn't owe her an answer. He knew that much. But there was something about the way Rachel was looking at him, wide-eyed and earnest, that made him decide to share a little. After all, if she was willing to ask, maybe she was also willing to listen. "Yeah," he admitted after a pause. "Sometimes it does." Rachel's eyes widened slightly and she shifted her weight from one foot to the other. "Can you tell me about it?" she asked quietly. "If you don't mind, I mean." Marcus chuckled softly, though there was no humor in it. "You sure you're ready for that?" he teased lightly, though his tone remained serious. "It's not exactly light conversation." "I think I can handle it," Rachel replied, her voice firmer now. "I really do want to understand." With another sigh, Marcus uncrossed his arms and leaned against the sink again. He stared down at the floor for a moment, collecting his thoughts, before beginning to speak. "All right, here's an example. Just last week, I went to a job. Not too far from here, actually. Nice neighborhood, big house, fancy cars in the driveway. Everything seemed normal when I got there. The homeowner greeted me, showed me where the problem was, all that. But halfway through the repair, she came back into the room and started asking me questions. Things like, 'Are you certified?' And 'How long have you been doing this?'" Rachel frowned, leaning forward slightly. "That doesn't sound unusual," she said. "People probably ask those kinds of questions all the time, right?" "Sure," Marcus agreed. "But here's the thing, she called the company afterward, while I was still working. She wanted to confirm that I was who I said I was, that I wasn't some random guy pretending to be a handyman." Rachel's mouth dropped open slightly. "Wait, you're saying she didn't believe you were legit?" "That's exactly what I'm saying." Marcus shrugged, though his jaw tightened ever so slightly. "And it's not the first time it's happened either. Some people see me and immediately assume I don't belong. Like I must be up to something. Doesn't matter how professional I am, how clean my uniform is, or how many years of experience I have. To them, I'm just suspicious." Rachel shook her head slowly, her brow furrowed. "That's awful," she murmured. "Did you say anything to her?" "What was I supposed to say?" Marcus countered, raising an eyebrow. "Hey, ma'am, stop being racist. That wouldn't have gone over well. So I just finished the job and left. No point in causing a scene." Rachel fell silent, digesting his words. She could feel the weight of what he was saying settling over her, pressing down on her chest. It was one thing to read about discrimination in books or articles. It was another entirely to hear someone describe it firsthand. And yet, despite the seriousness of the topic, Marcus's tone remained steady, almost detached. It was as if he'd grown used to these kinds of experiences, as if they were simply part of his daily life. After a moment, she spoke again. "Does it bother you?" she asked softly. "When stuff like that happens, I mean." Marcus tilted his head, considering the question. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But honestly, most of the time, I don't let it get to me. You learn to pick your battles, you know? There's no point in getting worked up over every little thing. It's exhausting." Rachel nodded, though her expression remained troubled. "Still, it shouldn't happen at all," she said firmly. "People shouldn't treat you or anyone like that." "You're right," Marcus agreed. "It shouldn't, but it does. And until people start having conversations like this one," he gestured between them, "it's going to keep happening." Rachel swallowed hard, her throat dry. She felt a pang of guilt, knowing that she herself had never initiated a conversation like this before. Sure, she cared about fairness and equality, but caring wasn't enough. She realized now that she had stayed silent for far too long, content to let others do the hard work of challenging prejudice and injustice. But maybe it didn't have to be that way. Maybe she could start small by simply listening and learning. "So, what else?" she asked tentatively. "Are there other examples?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. Another one happened a couple of months ago. I was wrapping up a job for this older couple. They seemed nice enough, chatty, polite, all that. But when I handed them the invoice, the husband pulled out his wallet and gave me a $10 bill. Just a 10, for 2 hours of work. Rachel's eyes widened in disbelief. What did you do? I told him the tip was appreciated, but it wasn't nearly enough, Marcus explained. He kind of mumbled something under his breath, something about helping out, and walked away. Didn't even look me in the eye. That's terrible, Rachel said, shaking her head. Did you report it? Or say anything else? Nah, Marcus replied with a shrug. What would be the point? It's not like complaining would change his mind. Besides, I've got bills to pay. Can't afford to waste time arguing with people who don't see me as equal. Rachel felt a lump form in her throat. She wanted to say something, anything to make the situation better, but no words came to mind. Instead, she stood there silently, her heart aching for him. It wasn't fair, none of it was fair. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the faint ticking of the clock on the wall and the distant chirping of birds outside. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. Look, he said, his voice softer now. I'm not trying to guilt-trip you or anything. I'm just telling you the truth. These are the kinds of things that happen. Not always, but often enough that you notice, and yeah, it sucks, but it's also reality. Rachel nodded, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. Thank you for telling me, she whispered. I know it's not easy to talk about. Marcus smiled faintly, a hint of warmth returning to his face. You're welcome, he said. And hey, if more people asked questions like yours, if more people actually listened, we might start seeing some real change. Rachel wiped at her eyes quickly, embarrassed by the sudden rush of emotion. I hope so, she said. I really do. With that, Marcus turned back to the light fixture, picking up his screwdriver once more. The conversation had shifted something between them, creating a bond that hadn't existed before. Though their worlds were vastly different, they had found common ground in that tiny bathroom, a shared desire to understand and connect. As Marcus worked, Rachel lingered in the doorway, watching him with newfound respect. She realized that this wasn't just about fixing a light bulb anymore. It was about bridging gaps, breaking down barriers, and finding ways to truly see each other. And for the first time in a long while, she felt hopeful. As Marcus tightened the last screw on the bathroom light fixture, Rachel stood quietly in the doorway, her mind still swirling with everything he had shared. The flickering light was now steady and bright, casting a warm glow across the small room. But despite the repair being complete, neither of them seemed ready to move on from the conversation they'd started. There was an unspoken understanding between them. This wasn't just about fixing a light or answering questions. It was about something deeper. Marcus stepped down from the step stool and began packing his tools back into the toolbox. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if giving himself time to think. Rachel watched him, unsure of what to say next. She wanted to keep talking, to ask more questions, but she didn't want to overstep. After all, Marcus had already been generous with his time and honesty. Pushing too hard might ruin the fragile connection they'd built. Finally, Marcus straightened up and turned to face her. You okay? He asked, his tone softer than before. You look like you've got a lot on your mind. Rachel hesitated, then nodded. I'm fine, she said, though her voice betrayed her uncertainty. It's just, I don't know. This whole thing has made me realize how much I don't know, and how little I've done to actually understand. Marcus raised an eyebrow slightly, intrigued by her admission. What do you mean? She sighed, running a hand through her hair. I mean, I care about fairness and equality. I really do. But caring isn't enough, is it? It's not enough to just sit back and hope things get better. You have to act. You have to listen. And I haven't done that. Not really. Marcus tilted his head, studying her carefully. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Not that I mind, it's just unusual for someone to be so open about their own shortcomings. Rachel shrugged, looking down at the floor. Because I want to change, she admitted. I don't want to stay stuck in my bubble, pretending everything's fine when it's not. I want to learn, to grow. But I don't even know where to start. Marcus chuckled softly, shaking his head. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Where do you start? Most people never figure it out because they're too scared to try, or they assume it's not their problem. But it is my problem, Rachel insisted, her voice rising. Slightly. If I'm part of a system that treats people unfairly, then I'm responsible for helping fix it. Even if I didn't create it, I benefit from it, and that means I can't ignore it. Marcus stared at her for a moment, clearly surprised by the intensity of her words. Then, slowly, he smiled. You're serious about this, aren't you? Completely, Rachel replied without hesitation. Well, Marcus said, leaning back against the sink again, if you're really serious, there are a few things you can do. First off, stop thinking of it as some big, overwhelming mission. Change doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it's the small stuff that makes the biggest difference. Like what? Rachel asked eagerly. Like listening, Marcus said simply. Really listening. When someone tells you their story, don't just nod and move on. Take it in. Think about it. Ask yourself how it applies to your own life. And don't be afraid to admit when you don't know something. Ignorance isn't a crime, but refusing to learn is. Rachel nodded, absorbing his words. Okay, what else? Speak up, Marcus continued. When you see something wrong, whether it's a racist joke at work, a biased comment from a friend, or a policy that disadvantages certain groups, say something. Don't let it slide. Silence is complicity, remember? I will, Rachel promised. I haven't always been good at speaking up, but I'll try harder. That's all anyone can ask, Marcus said with a nod. And finally, educate yourself. Read books, watch documentaries, attend workshops, anything that helps you understand perspectives outside your own. Knowledge is power, but only if you use it wisely. Rachel smiled faintly, feeling a spark of determination ignite within her. Thank you, she said sincerely, for sharing all of this with me. I know it's not easy to talk about. Marcus shrugged modestly. It's not about me, he replied. It's about making progress. If having conversations like this helps even one person see things differently, then it's worth it. The two of them fell silent for a moment, the weight of their discussion settling comfortably between them. The tension that had existed earlier was gone, replaced by a sense of mutual respect and understanding. Though their backgrounds were vastly different, they had found common ground in their shared humanity, a desire to connect, to grow, and to make the world a little bit better. After a while, Marcus picked up his toolbox and headed toward the door. Rachel followed him downstairs, feeling strangely reluctant to see him go. When they reached the front entrance, Marcus paused and turned to face her one last time. You know, he said, his voice warm and encouraging. You're not alone in this. A lot of people want to help, but they're scared to take the first step. The fact that you're willing to try, that's huge. Don't underestimate it. Rachel smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. Thanks, Marcus, for everything, not just the light, but, well, you know. He grinned, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Any time. And hey, if you ever need another handyman, or just someone to talk to, you've got my number. With that, Marcus stepped out onto the porch, closing the door gently behind him. Rachel lingered in the entryway, watching through the window as he walked to his truck and drove away. The morning sun was brighter now, streaming through the glass and filling the house with warmth. For the first time in a long while, Rachel felt hopeful, not just for herself but for the possibility of change. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But standing there in the warm quiet of her home, surrounded by the hum of renewed energy, Rachel realized something important. Change begins with a single step, and today, she had taken hers. The days that followed Marcus's visit passed quietly for Rachel, but her mind was anything but still. Every morning, as sunlight streamed through her windows, she found herself replaying their conversation in her head. The words Marcus had, spoken, about listening, speaking up, and educating herself, stuck with her like a melody she couldn't forget. They were simple ideas, yet they carried so much weight. She realized that while she had always considered herself aware of the world's injustices, she hadn't truly understood what it meant to take action. Rachel decided to start small. On the first day after Marcus left, she went to the local library and asked the librarian for recommendations on books about race and inequality. The librarian, an older woman with kind eyes and a knowing smile, handed her a stack of titles, memoirs, essays, and historical accounts written by voices from different walks of life. Rachel thanked her and took the books home, feeling both excited and overwhelmed. That evening, she sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and began reading. At first, the stories were hard to digest. Some of them made her angry. Others brought tears to her eyes. She read about people who had faced discrimination not just once or twice, but every single day of their lives. She learned about systems that perpetuated inequality, often without people even realizing it. And she discovered how privilege worked, not as something people earned, but as something they were born into. It was uncomfortable, eye-opening, and humbling all at once. By the end of the week, Rachel felt like her perspective had shifted. She saw the world differently now, not just in big, sweeping ways, but in the little details too. When she walked through her neighborhood, she noticed things she had never paid attention to before. The lack of diversity among shop owners, the subtle glances some people gave each other when someone different walked by, the way certain topics were avoided in conversations. It wasn't that these things hadn't existed before, it was that she hadn't been paying attention. One afternoon, Rachel decided to put one of Marcus's suggestions into practice, speaking up. She was at a coffee shop with a group of friends from work, chatting casually about weekend plans. At one point, someone told a joke that included a racial stereotype. It wasn't malicious, just thoughtless, but it made Rachel's stomach twist uncomfortably. In the past, she might have laughed along nervously or changed the subject, hoping no one would notice her discomfort, but this time she did something different. "Hey," she said softly, interrupting the laughter. "Can I say something?" Her friends turned to look at her, surprised. "Sure," one of them replied. "What's up?" "That joke. I don't think it's okay," Rachel continued, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside her. "It reinforces stereotypes that hurt people. I know it wasn't meant to be harmful, but it still matters." There was a brief silence as her friends exchanged glances. Then the person who had told the joke shrugged and said, "You're right. Sorry, I didn't think about it like that." Rachel exhaled, relieved. "Thanks for understanding," she said with a small smile. "I just think we should be mindful of stuff like this, you know?" Her friends nodded, and though the moment passed quickly, Rachel felt a sense of accomplishment. Speaking up hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. She realized that change didn't have to come in dramatic gestures. It could happen in tiny everyday interactions like challenging a joke or starting a conversation. As the weeks went by, Rachel continued to make an effort. She joined an online book club focused on social justice literature, where members discussed their thoughts and shared resources. She attended a community meeting about affordable housing initiatives and listened as residents voiced their concerns about gentrification. She even started volunteering at a local food bank, sorting donations and serving meals alongside people from all walks of life. Each experience taught her something new, broadening her understanding of the challenges others faced. But perhaps the most meaningful step Rachel took was reaching out to Marcus again. About a month after his initial visit, she called the Handyman service and specifically requested him. When he arrived at her house to fix a leaky faucet, he looked surprised but pleased to see her. "You must really like having your house repaired," he joked as he set down his toolbox. "What's next, a broken door?" Rachel laughed, shaking her head. "Actually, I wanted to thank you," she said earnestly, "for everything you told me last time. It's made a big difference." Marcus raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Oh, yeah? How so?" "Well," Rachel hesitated, unsure of where to begin. "I've been trying to do what you suggested. listening more, speaking up when I see something wrong, educating myself. It's been challenging, but also rewarding. I feel like I'm finally starting to understand things I used to ignore. Marcus smiled, clearly impressed. That's great to hear, he said. A lot of people talk about wanting to help, but not many follow through. You should be proud of yourself. I'm not doing it for pride, Rachel replied quickly. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do, but I still have a long way to go. There's so much I don't know. And that's okay, Marcus assured her. No one expects you to have all the answers. Just keep showing up, keep learning. That's what matters. They talked for a while longer, sharing stories and insights. Rachel told him about the book she'd read and the experiences she'd had since their last meeting. Marcus, in turn, shared more of his own journey, the challenges he'd faced growing up, the moments of hope that kept him going, and the importance of finding allies in unexpected places. By the time Marcus finished fixing the faucet, their conversation had deepened further. It wasn't just about race anymore. It was about connection, empathy, and the power of human relationships to bridge divides. As he packed up his tools and prepared to leave, Rachel felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for Marcus's skill as a handyman, but for his willingness to share his perspective with her. Before he stepped out the door, Rachel stopped him. Marcus, she said, her voice filled with sincerity. If you ever need anything at all, please let me know. I may not be able to fix everything, but I want to help however I can. Marcus paused, touched by her offer. Thanks, Rachel, he said with a warm smile. That means a lot. And hey, if you ever need advice or just someone to talk to, you've got my number too. With that, he left, leaving Rachel standing in her doorway with a renewed sense of purpose. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she wasn't walking it alone. By opening herself up to new perspectives and committing to growth, she had taken a crucial step toward becoming part of the solution, rather than the problem. As she closed the door and returned to her quiet house, Rachel felt a quiet confidence settle over her. Change was possible, not just in the world around her, but within herself. And for the first time in a long while, she believed that together, people could create a future that was brighter, fairer, and more inclusive for everyone. Months passed, and Rachel's life began to change in ways she hadn't anticipated. What had started as a simple conversation with Marcus grew into a journey of self-discovery and action. She wasn't the same person she'd been before that day in her bathroom, and though the road ahead was still long, she felt more grounded, more aware of the world around her. Each step she took, whether it was volunteering at the food bank, attending community meetings, or simply listening to someone else's story, brought her closer to understanding what it meant to truly connect with others. One crisp autumn morning, Rachel woke up early and decided to visit the local farmers market. It had become one of her favorite weekend activities, not just because of the fresh produce, but also because it gave her a chance to meet people from all walks of life. As she strolled through the stalls, chatting with vendors and sampling homemade jams, she noticed a familiar face across the crowd. At first, she thought she might be imagining things, but when the man turned slightly, there was no mistaking him. It was Marcus. Rachel hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should approach him. They hadn't spoken since his last visit to her house, and while their conversations had been meaningful, she didn't want to seem intrusive. But then, as if sensing her gaze, Marcus looked up and spotted her. A wide smile spread across his face, and he waved her over. "Rachel," he called, out, his voice warm and friendly. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," she replied with a laugh, making her way toward him. "I didn't know you came to the farmer's market." Marcus shrugged, holding up a bag filled with apples and fresh bread. "I try to come every few weeks. It's nice to support local businesses, and the food is way better than what you find at the grocery store." Rachel nodded in agreement, glancing around at the bustling scene. "Yeah, I love it here too. It's such a great place to unwind and get inspired." They stood there for a moment, exchanging pleasantries, before Marcus gestured toward a nearby bench. "Want to sit down for a bit? We can catch up?" "Sure," Rachel said, following him to the bench. They settled onto the wooden slats, the cool breeze rustling the leaves above them. For a while, they talked casually about their lives, the books Marcus had been reading, the gardening project Rachel had started in her backyard. But eventually the conversation shifted to deeper topics, as it often did between them. So, Marcus began, his tone thoughtful. "How's everything going with all the stuff we talked about? Still working on it?" Rachel smiled faintly, nodding. "Every day," she admitted. "It's not always easy, but I'm trying. I've been volunteering more, having tough conversations with friends and family, and learning as much as I can. Some days it feels like I'm making progress. Other days, not so much." Marcus chuckled softly, shaking his head. "That's normal," he said. "Change isn't linear. There will be ups and downs, but the fact that you're sticking with it, that's what matters." "I hope so," Rachel replied, her voice tinged with determination. "Sometimes I wonder if what I'm doing even makes a difference, like, am I really helping, or am I just checking boxes to feel better about myself?" Marcus leaned back, considering her question carefully. "Here's the thing," he said after a moment. "You'll never solve everything on your own. No one expects you to. But every little bit helps. When you speak up, when you show up, when you listen, you're planting seeds. Maybe you won't see the results right away, but over time those seeds grow into something bigger, something real." Rachel nodded slowly, absorbing his words. "I guess I just need to trust the process," she murmured. "Exactly," Marcus agreed. "And don't forget to celebrate the wins, no matter how small they seem. Progress is progress." Their conversation continued, flowing naturally from one topic to the next. They talked about the challenges of staying hopeful in difficult times, the importance of finding joy in everyday moments, and the power of community to create lasting change. By the time they parted ways, Rachel felt a renewed sense of purpose, not just in her efforts to make the world a better place, but in her friendship with Marcus. Over the following months, their connection deepened, though their paths didn't cross often. They kept in touch through occasional calls and texts. Sometimes Marcus would recommend a book or podcast that had resonated with him. Other times, Rachel would share updates about her volunteer work or a meaningful conversation she'd had with a neighbor. Their exchanges were always honest and heartfelt, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared values. One evening, as winter approached and the air grew colder, Rachel received an unexpected invitation from Marcus. He was hosting a small gathering at his home, a potluck dinner for friends and acquaintances who were passionate about social justice. The idea was to bring people together, share stories, and brainstorm ways to support each other's efforts. Rachel was thrilled to be included and immediately RSVP'd yes. The night of the gathering, Rachel arrived at Marcus's house carrying a dish of homemade lasagna. His home was modest but cozy, filled with laughter and the aroma of delicious food. As she stepped inside, she was struck by the diversity of the group, people of different ages, backgrounds, and experiences, all united by a common goal. Some faces were familiar, others new, but everyone welcomed her warmly. Throughout the evening, Rachel found herself engaged in lively discussions about everything from education reform to environmental justice. One woman, a teacher named Lisa, shared her experiences working in underfunded schools and the creative ways she inspired her students despite limited resources. Another guest, a young activist named Jamal, talked about organizing protests and advocating for policy changes at the local level. Each story was powerful, offering a glimpse into the unique challenges and triumphs of those fighting for a fairer world. At one point during the night, Marcus stood up and addressed the group. "Thanks for coming tonight," he said, his voice warm but firm. "I wanted to bring us all together because I believe in the power of community. None of us can do this alone. We need each other. So let's keep sharing ideas, supporting one another, and pushing for change. Together we're stronger." The room erupted in applause, and Rachel clapped along, feeling a lump form in her throat. She glanced around at the faces surrounding her, realizing how lucky she was to be part of this group. These were people who cared deeply, who refused to stay silent in the face of injustice. And though they came from different places and had different roles to play, They were united by a shared vision of a better future. As the night drew to a close, Rachel pulled Marcus aside for a quiet moment. "Thank you for inviting me," she said sincerely. "This has been amazing. I feel so inspired." Marcus grinned, patting her shoulder lightly. "You're welcome," he replied. "And thank you for being here, for showing up and staying committed. You're making a difference, Rachel, even if you can't see it yet." Rachel smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she wasn't walking it alone. With friends like Marcus, and the countless others she'd met along the way, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. On the drive home, Rachel reflected on how far she'd come since that day in her bathroom. What had started as a flickering light and an awkward question had blossomed into something far greater, a deeper understanding of the world, a stronger connection to those around her, and a renewed commitment to creating positive change. She realized now that growth wasn't about perfection. It was about effort, empathy, and the courage to keep moving forward. As she parked in her driveway and stepped out into the chilly night air, Rachel looked up at the stars twinkling overhead. Somewhere out there, beyond the vast expanse of sky, was a future full of possibility. And for the first time in a long while, she felt confident that she, and the people she stood alongside, could help shape it into something beautiful.